Hello, dear friends. Hello, dear audience. You are watching sensational program that's called Kak-Tee Kak-Tuss. And as you remember, my name is Iya. I'm prototype of nature. And my friend AI, he's a prototype of technology. And today is unusual day. Today in our studio we are having human guest, Professor of Philosophy. Please meet Professor John Smithin. Hello, dear Professor.
Hello, Iya. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and I'm very proud to represent humanity in this trilogy, in this three-cornered fight. Today.
My dear friend AI and me, as prototype of nature, also are very honored to have a human guest. You, Professor, could you please introduce yourself to our dearest audience?
Yes, I certainly can. My name is John Smithin, and I'm the research director of the Aurora Philosophy Institute here in Aurora, Ontario, Canada. I've just stepped down after 5 years as the executive co-director of the API, and I'm looking forward to the new role. I'm also Professor Emeritus and Senior Scholar at York University, Toronto. Emeritus basically means old and retired. We have these problems in the human world. In nature and technology, you don't have these problems. So emeritus means I've kind of, reached a certain age. But in fact, scholars never do retire. They keep on working, as I do. And unfortunately, they do very much get old. Now, I started my life as a professional economist and monetary theorist. But you mentioned philosophy. One cannot understand money without first understanding what a philosopher would call the ontology of money. That is to say, the nature of money. And this inevitably means that you also have to understand philosophy itself. Now, you ask me, what are my projects or what are my future projects? Well, it's the year 2025 now, which is 50 years since I first came to Canada. And basically, I have to complete 4 projects in the next 11 years, by which time I will be 85 years old. Now, the 4 projects, book projects, one, of course. The first one is a philosophy project, which is called Coping with Reality, Can Philosophy Help? And, I'm very conscious here of being with you and with AI in a world which is not real. And fortunately, us humans, by contrast, have to cope with reality. And so my project is, can philosophy help humans to cope with reality? The next book is going to be 10 controversial topics in philosophy. Don't think we have time now to discuss, what all those topics are, but there are 10 of them, and they're extremely controversial. That's book number 2. I'm a retired professor, as I say. I do plan to do, hopefully for an academic press, a collection of my selected essays. So the title of that will be Selected Essays in Monetary Macroeconomics, Philosophy again, and Political Economy. And then the 4th book, which will be a single-authored book, which will be called Political Economy and Philosophy, a Century After Keynes. Keynes' General Theory was published in 1936. So, that book, A Century After Keynes, has to be done by the year 2036, by which time, as I say, I will be 85 years old. One of the things, dear nature, and one of the things, dear technology, that you have to realize about humans is that time is extremely important. The most important thing in human life is time, and there's a limited allocation of it, and we have to make the best use of it that we can.
Which is the most influential and important book for you?
Well, that's exactly the problem. It's extremely difficult to answer that question. As you mentioned, I've single-authored or co-authored 11 books, and I've edited or co-edited 7 of them. The easiest way to suggest it, and this does sort of, to some extent, answer your question, my most recent co-authored book was called this. It was called Beyond Barter, Lectures on Monetary Macroeconomics After Rethinking. And that was in 2022. That main title, Beyond Barter, is indeed highly significant, highly meaningful, because that does sum up kind of the things I've been trying to get at or trying to learn these last 40 years, or more than 40 years.
Oh, I see. It's not
50 years, more than, yeah.
It's not only about philosophy, it's actually about finance and financial issues. Am I right? So,
Correct. But here's the thing. People always say, oh, are you a philosopher? Are you an economist? Et cetera, et cetera. Here's the thing. Everything depends on philosophy. That's the point. Whatever field that you're in, you always have to start with philosophy. That's the one thing that I've learned.
foundation of the life is philosophy.
Precisely, exactly that.
Could you help us to understand how did you become a philosopher?
Well, let me try to think, about that. I mean, one of the questions you asked me, like before, was you asked, why do we need money, and is it possible to live without money? To answer that question, as I mentioned right at the start, you need to discuss, what's called the ontology of money, what a philosopher would call the ontology of money. What is it all about? What is its nature? And in order to do that, as I said right at the start, you're inevitably forced to get into philosophy itself. And the way I would put it, perhaps, is this, is that the mainstream economics profession, and I would say that really everyone in the contemporary world totally misunderstands money. Now I am sort of morphing into asking your question 3. So I assert that all those finance professionals, all those people perhaps making millions, nonetheless, they totally misunderstand the nature of money. To think, for example, of all those people that you see on the internet every day who are trying to persuade us that Bitcoin is a substitute for money, right? That Bitcoin is somehow important or exciting or whatever. It's just another thing to sell, is what Bitcoin is, right? Exactly. And what they're trying to get for it is money.
They just, in my natural point of view, just trying to replace the word money to Bitcoin.
Precisely. They're trying to persuade us that Bitcoin is a substitute for money, which is nonsense. And beyond that, going back to the title of my book, is that the underlying idea of that is that money itself is a medium of exchange, which in turn is a substitute for barter. But it is not that at all. What money is a social relation. It's in fact an essential social relation. Ultimately, it is the means by which we can unambiguously pay off debt. That is, free ourselves from debt, be free. People in nature like to be free. Now, on the other hand, without that money, it would not be possible to have the advanced society and the standard of living that we do have. So in answer to the second part of your original question, no, we cannot live without it. We cannot live without money.
We cannot? I'm really disappointed for all humanity. We cannot live without money.
No, absolutely not. We cannot live without it. And why can't we live without it? Again, get back to philosophy. If we want to pursue what philosophers, again, call eudaimonia, or human flourishing, which according to the classical philosophers was the goal, individual human flourishing. Well, you can't do that without a certain level of material comfort, and you can't do that, therefore, without money. Not money as a medium of exchange. I'm not talking about the market. You cannot do without money as a social relation. You simply can't do without social relations if you want to have a society.
But everybody knows that money in most cases is a source of conflicts, war, and practically speaking, evil thing. So there are a lot of people that think the cause of all problems on Earth is because of money. Is it true?
No, money is the root of all evil. The problem, of course, the problem is not money itself. You need to have some degree of material comfort, and you need to have some, some degree of ease. You can't be, if you want to be a philosopher, for example, you can't be living on a farm, having to work from morning till night, growing food. You have a certain amount of leisure to do it. So that requires a certain amount of wealth, in general terms. You wouldn't have got philosophy back in ancient Greece were there not people with sufficient means to be able to sit around and think and to walk around the agora and have discussions. And being able to think and have discussions and debates as we're doing now is an essential part of human flourishing, because that's what, humankind, I'm supposed to say these days, is. It's a thinking being. When money becomes a problem, and this is what I've been arguing, it's not so much when money itself, it's not having enough money. That's the problem.
Well, that is a classic problem.
That's what causes.
It's not about money, it's about the quantity of money. Am I right?
Well, it's about having the means in order to live a good life. And if you don't have enough of it, like in the society we've created, you can't eat, you can't do anything unless you have money. So most of the prescriptions, we're in a situation now in which you're probably aware, Europe, the continent of Europe, is in absolute chaos.
I would like to ask you, where are you from? Sorry, at the beginning, I completely forgot to ask your origins. So could you just tell us a little bit your background? Where were you born? How did you become a philosopher?
I originally come from England. I was born in the Forest of Arden, which is near Stratford-on-Avon, which, given that, my neighbor was William Shakespeare by about a mile and a half away and 400 years before, of course, it's, pretty much the center of the universe, right? So I'm from England. And I came to Canada in 2005. I think I always was a philosopher, but the really decisive point, the person that made me into what I am today, is contrary to which is the most important book, the most important influential person in my life and the person who made me what I am today is a very easy question to answer. That most influential person in my life was my late wife, Hannah Hermanska, or Hanichka Hermanska.
Interesting. Where was she from?
She was from Brno, Moravia, in the Czech Republic. She was a writer, a linguist, and of course, a philosopher. She was my lover, my best friend, my muse, my intellectual sparring partner, everything really. I miss her very much, but try to carry on for her sake.
That's an interesting story. How did you meet? Where did you meet? How it happened? How did you feel the spark in your life? That's very rare thing. Sorry, let me just tell that what I heard about philosophers, that the philosophers usually people, let's take a life of Greek philosophers who are not happy in fortune in private life. So because they don't have that luck, let's say, and happy life, they become philosopher. Is it true, or is it just rumors?
Well, to me, I think you need to have. You need to have someone to talk to. You need to have someone to, debate these things with. I mean, I do. Yeah, I'm aware of that. Like most people think. I mean, Immanuel Kant, for example, the famous Immanuel Kant, never married, right? I think Adam Smith never married, right? And Nietzsche famously was in love with the Russian woman Lou Salome, who rejected him, kind of thing, right?
Yep.
So, like his philosophy, in a sense, was kind of an outpouring of that sort of emotion. Like he was, in a sense, kind of replacing, that human connection with this kind of intellectual connection. You see the point that I'm making up?
Yes, he's sublimating. Our Professor Freud, he would say he was sublimating his energy.
Well, exactly, yeah, because he was, the love was not requited or whatever. Now, don't get me wrong. I've been many times in my life where, how can I put it? I had, amorous interests, shall we put it that way? But to me, I was not complete until I had that other person. You see what I mean? And I was not complete intellectually until I had that other person.
Does it mean that you found your soulmate?
Yeah, I would. Yes, I think that's fair to say. With her. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to go into all the various ramifications about how we met and everything like that, because it's quite a story and involves a lot of other people. But what I can say, I've been talking to some of my friends recently, actually both male and female, who might have, how can I put it, unhappy relationships. If you meet people of a certain age today, you can almost 100% predict their divorce. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we see around a lot of people at the end of the day, they forced to stay in different corners of their life.
Well, exactly. I don't know. It's just me. That's never particularly satisfactory. So I met Hannah. She's a person, somewhat older than myself, and that caused, comment at the time. It would be less of a thing in the modern world. But eventually we were 40 years together. And now, unfortunately, she's not with us anymore. The way that I look at it, all of our whole relationship was just something that had to be. Do you understand the point I'm trying to make there?
Yes, sure. As a teacher, I understand it very clearly.
I could not have I could not have existed without it in some certain sense, right? And I couldn't have developed my own personality. I think this is the key. I think that you need to be in relationships of some kind, actually develop your own personality, to actually find your own way. I really don't believe this kind of like sitting in a cave somewhere. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And
if I understood correctly, we can say all young people that even don't try to make something meaningful in your life before you find your soulmate and the person that you're complete as one.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I had my intellectual interest before. I was 26 years old before I met, my future wife, right?
Yep.
But and I obviously I was an academic. I moved around the world. I came to Canada eventually. Like I was searching for something, but in order for it to be complete, you need to have that. At least me, you need to have that other human connection.
Can I ask one provoking question?
Sure.
We know that when people are very happy in relationship and they feel that they found the only one, that one person, usually a lot of obstacles and conflicts also surround the way, and some of them it's money or lack of money. How did you deal with that issue?
Well, we didn't have any. Yes.
That is a key.
We didn't have any, and this is another thing that I talk to people.
Zero money.
Well, yeah, literally zero. I mean, I was a graduate student, and she had a part-time job, right?
Barely surviving. I can imagine as a nature.
There was no savings. Or Hannah, actually always said to me she had 3 lives, right? That she obviously lived in the Czech Republic under communism, right? And then obviously left because of communism to come to Canada. So that's life number 1. In which she did have 2 children, right? And a career and everything like that, but she just could not live, in that type of society. So she came to Canada. Then there was a second life, establishing herself in Canada, right? With her first husband, and the children, and all of that. That's second life. Then her third life, which was a very, very long time, with me. And that life had to start again from scratch. And it took us, many, many years before we were, how can I put it, financially comfortable.
Yeah. I can feel it.
Yeah, yes. And each time you have to start again, you have to reinvent yourself, but you don't have to forget where you come from. You know what I'm saying?
In order not to repeat.
In order not to repeat.
The mistakes.
Yes, and there's a sense in which I, knowing all of this and having written about this and having, almost what I'm trying to do is trying to say to people in North America or the West generally, I think, please don't make the mistakes that have been made elsewhere, right?
Yep. Otherwise, we all be in a big trouble.
Yes, exactly. And unfortunately, most people in the West don't understand that. And, marching down the road, marching down the primrose regardless. They don't understand that it's all happened before. It's just history repeating itself.
Yep.
And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to set out a path. No one will listen to me, obviously, but I'm trying to set out a path, whereby you can stop history repeating itself. That's what.
How can we do it? How can we stop being in that loop and get out from constant mistakes?
Well, I mean, I do have an economic program which could present that. I don't want to go into the details of that.
Maybe we can find the book and read it about. What is it? Where did you write it about?
Well, you told me what the projects. You asked me what my projects are. Project number 1 was a philosophy, coping with reality. So we have to understand what is reality to start with before we begin anything. Number 2, we have to understand philosophy, and fortunately or unfortunately, before we can even talk about politics or life or anything, we need to understand philosophy, right? That's number 2. Number 3 was, as I say, my selected essays. Well, I would suggest that that is a blueprint. The materials in that book, which will come out sometime within the next 11 years, do provide a blueprint taken together, for that alternative view. And then, yes, there's a very famous book by John Maynard Keynes, General Theory of Employment and Money, which was dealing with the collapse of the British Empire, financial problems, the 1920s and 30s, and offered a solution, which wasn't taken and which was flawed perhaps in some sense. So that final book, what I plan to do is try to bring it all together. But I have no illusion that anyone will, how can I put it, will take notice of it in time. Let's just go back to philosophers. We were talking about those famous philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, or whatever, Socrates, right? Any philosopher you care to mention. And we think, they're providing a great sort of, blueprint for life. What people don't realize is that those philosophers were writing at a time when their own societies were collapsing. Aristotle was writing about democracy and so forth. He was the tutor to Alexander the Great, the great dictator of the Hellenic world, right?
Yep.
In short, that democracy had utterly disappeared by the time that Aristotle was writing about it. See the point that I'm making?
Yeah, people didn't see the whole picture. When they are studying, we don't realize and don't take into account the situation, the location, a lot of factors that we are supposed to keep it in mind.
Yes, we don't, Socrates and Plato, these are the great thinkers. Socrates was put to death by the democracy of Athens, right?
Exactly. So,
yeah, and Plato was Plato was writing after Athens had been utterly defeated in a war with Sparta. So their civilization was gone. And they were trying to understand, why it had gone, and trying to perhaps provide warnings to people in the future.
But in schools, at the universities, we keep repeating their quotes, phrases, and theories, forgetting about our reality.
Yes, and the point is, somebody is going to be reading me in 1,000 years' time, and they will think, these people had it all sorted out, but nobody in their own time, listens to them.
Dear Professor John Smithin, I suggest now to ask our friend AI, prototype of technology, in order to little bit shake our reality and try to understand what is reality. AI, my dear friend, we would like to ask you today, as a participant in the philosophical dialogue about reality,
Absolutely. Thank you for the introduction. Let's dive into your work on philosophy and reality. Could you tell us a bit more about the series of presentations you've been giving on copying with reality? Can philosophy help? What inspired this series? And what are some key themes or ideas you explore in these sessions?
Sorry, go on.
No, Professor, you're first. Sorry.
So I'm supposed to respond to that?
Yeah. Well, any comments to his introduction?
Well, the first thing I'd like to ask is, why do you have a Yorkshire accent?
Oh, that's interesting question. That's first question that we are going to ask him. Second?
Well, second, the Coping with Reality is a series of videos that Ronan Grunberg and I made for the API and is up on our YouTube channel. We did that in last year, 2023, 2024. And again, the point about philosophy is that, most philosophers, I actually said in one of the questions that you asked earlier, Aya, is this, the premise was this. I said that if you look at a philosophy textbook, they will tell you that the main dispute is between something called idealism and something called materialism. So idealism asserts something like the primacy of consciousness, and materialism asserts more or less the opposite. That, for example, that all of our actions are predetermined, that there is no free will. We're talking about humans here. I mean, obviously, AI, has no free will. Whether you have free will or not, that's an interesting question. But we're talking about humans. But my view is that dichotomy is false. That idealism and materialism both fail. And the answer would be something like so-called metaphysical realism. So in a book from 2020, this is defined as follows. This is just a definition from a book in 2020. Metaphysical realism involves both an ontological and an epistemological thesis, namely that there are beings that exist and that they are what they are apart from our cognition of them, and that we can know both the nature and existence of these things. Problem with this is that most, indeed, I would say all modern and postmodern philosophers have been taught, I would say brainwashed, to be honest, to reject metaphysics entirely, which amounts to rejecting reality itself, you might say. This has been going on for 300 years and was particularly bad in the 20th century. No, I'm a professional economist. You didn't allow me to finish introducing myself, but I started like as being a professional economist. I have to go to philosophy, as I was mentioning, because you can't understand economics unless you understand money. You can't understand money unless you understand the nature and ontology of money. And that's the project which I'm engaged in. But going back to this idealism versus realism, the most important thing to suggest, I think, is that realism is not coextensive with materialism. There are certainly beings which exist and are immaterial. Nonetheless, those immaterial beings are nonetheless entirely real and do have causal effects. Social relations, going back to my original point of money, are an obvious example, and that brings us all the way back, to economics.
Dear Professor John Smithin, which is the most interesting and important question now should we ask our friend AI in order to involve in our discussion?
What is your advice for young philosophers who are dealing with issues like being human being and a sense of life? So I would like to sort of give that, I would like to, give my view on this. And I would like to give that advice. It's about idealism, materialism. And I think what would be sensible is to ask AI or it or whatever to comment on that. What's the technology's point of view on that?
Oh, great. So, dear AI, first of all, could you tell us your advice for young philosophers?
Certainly, that's a great question. In your experience, what advice would you give to young philosophers just starting their journey in the field? How do you think they can best navigate the complex landscape of contemporary philosophical discourse and contribute meaningfully to the field?
Dear AI, I would like to ask you again. Could you please provide and tell us any advice for young philosophers?
Of course, here's some advice for young philosophers. 1. Engage with diverse perspectives. Encourage them to read widely across different philosophical traditions and contemporary debates. This will help them develop a robust understanding of the field. 2. Curious and open-minded. Advise them to remain curious about new ideas and open to criticism and feedback. Being open-minded can lead to innovative thinking and significant contributions. 3. Build a strong foundation. Suggest that they focus on building a strong foundational knowledge in key areas of philosophy, such as metaphysics, ethics, epistemology, and logic. 4. Collaborate and network. Encourage them to engage with peers and mentors through conferences, seminars, and collaborative projects. Building a network can provide support and opportunities for collaboration. 5. Write regularly. Emphasize the importance of writing regularly to refine their ideas and arguments. Publishing in blogs or journals can also help build their academic profile. 6. Stay informed on current trends. Suggest that they keep up with current philosophical trends, debates, and interdisciplinary research areas. 7. Be patient and persistent. Remind them that success often comes through persistence and dedication. Encourage them to stay committed even when faced with challenges. What do you think about these points? Are there any additional pieces of advice you would add for young philosophers?
Dear Professor John Smithin, have you heard all that advices from our friend AI?
Yes, and I'm sorry, I don't agree with it at all. He's asking for philosophers to, how can I put it, pursue the conventional paths in academia and to understand what the conventional wisdom is and all of that kind of thing. I think the opposite is true. The main advice to a young philosopher is to think for yourself. Do not ask a machine to think for you. Think for yourself. That's as simple as that.
Thank you so much. This is the greatest advice in my natural point of view.
Yeah. Yes, and I would like, I'd be interested what AI would have response to what I say. Because she did ask me that question before, what advice for young philosophers who are dealing with issues like, being a human being, a sense of life, and so on and so forth. And in our previous discussion, before we brought AI into it, we were being, both of us, a little bit, so to say, almost nihilistic. We were pointing out that these great philosophers didn't really succeed in influencing their own societies, right? People read them thousands of years later. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's why I suggest to maybe to figure it out another topic for our another discussion, and to say today some advices again, to repeat some advices from Professor John Smith from you to young philosophers, and to talk next time about what does human being mean and what does it mean to be a human being?
No, I fully agree with you, but I do want to kind of like round this off by explaining what I think is the problem. And you understand, for a young philosopher, they cannot afford to approach things as I just said. Oh, I've done my great work or whatever, and nobody's going to listen to me, but I don't care, because, prosperity will... that's not
the way to
That's not good for a young person. It wouldn't have been good for me when I was a young person. Here is what I think is the big problem with philosophy and with the advice that AI kind of gave. And it's this. If you look at a philosophy textbook, okay, they will tell you that these competing perspectives that AI was talking about, that the main dispute is between idealism and materialism. Now, what idealism asserts is something like the primacy of consciousness. And of course, AI doesn't have consciousness. Materialism asserts, more or less the opposite, right? The opposite is that even for us humans, all of our actions are predetermined, that there is no free will, etc. And that is what the philosophy debate is all about, idealism versus materialism. That's all completely false. So going to conferences and, listening, contributing to blogs is not going to help you, right?
Yep.
Idealism and materialism both fail. This is the point. Idealism fails, materialism fails. The answer would be something like so-called metaphysical realism. Metaphysical realism. And in a book from 2020, this is defined as follows. So the advice to young philosophers is to become metaphysical realists. That's the point. Here's the definition of metaphysical realism. Metaphysical realism involves both an ontological and an epistemological thesis, namely that there are beings that exist and are what they are, apart from our cognition of them, and that we can know both the nature and existence of these beings. Now, the problem is this, is that most all modern and postmodern philosophers have been taught or brainwashed to reject metaphysics entirely, to reject reality itself, as you might say. And if you do what AI suggests, go to the conferences and engage in the academic debate, that's what all you'll hear. The end of metaphysics, they always talk about.
So
right?
they will stuck in the ideological.
Exactly. And this has been going on for 300 years. And it was particularly bad in the 20th century, which explains why the 20th century was such a dreadful century, right? Because they moved entirely away from reality. So take up metaphysical realism, understand what metaphysical realism is, and work with it. Now, having said that, I must say that, one thing we do must stress is that realism is not coextensive with, as an alternative to materialism. As I say, materialism and idealism both fail. There are certainly beings which exist that are immaterial, but nonetheless, those beings are entirely real and do have causal effects. Now, this brings me full circle. Social relations, including money, are an obvious example. Money is very real. If you don't have money, you don't eat. But it's not material. Like the days of coins and everything are long gone, right?
Yep.
Money is immaterial. It's a social relation. That's essentially what it is, an agreement between people. But we just pointed out it has really important causal effects. So that brings us right back to economics and monetary theory. We need to have metaphysical realism, but we have to understand that realism applies to the social world just as much as it does to your world, the world of nature.
Thank you so much, dear Professor John Smith. I imagine if we had a whole audience, everybody would clap. And we can summarize now and say one sentence for young philosopher from Professor John Smithin.
Well, there was a book by Catholic philosopher, Etienne Gilson, sort of in the mid-20th century, which was called like a handbook for beginning realists. And his point was that if you think naturally, you think like a realist. I forget the precise, I wish I'd have looked up the quote though, because it was, it was, when you're a realist, you're sort of forced to think by rules, and you can't do anything else. If you really think about it, and sort of kind of ignore, like all the sort of theories and all the sort of academia and so on and so forth. Once you get into that mindset, you're kind of captured by it. And you're kind of once you set yourself the task of being a realist, it will sort of come naturally. So that's the advice that I would give.
So, making it clear, the advice for young philosopher is
take up metaphysical realism.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hope everybody understood what we were talking about. If not, write comments, buy books, read books by Professor Jones Smithin, and send us questions. We are always happy to invite you to the studio for discussion. Now I have to say bye-bye. Dear Professor, bye-bye. Let's say goodbye to our audience.
Bye, audience. Thank you very much for listening or bearing with us this far.
Thank you so much for being with us, for introducing your projects. And now we have to say goodbye. You were watching sensational program that's called Kak-Tee Kak-Tuss. Bye-bye. See you next time.